"Call 911 now, she's turning blue," Willie Kellerman shouted as he dropped his mop and sprinted forward. Gasps erupted across the executive boardroom. Just minutes earlier, Reagan Ashcroft, the billionaire CEO of Ashcroft Holdings in Philadelphia, had been standing at the head of the conference table presenting quarterly numbers. Then, mid-sentence, she stopped. Her hand rose to her chest, her breath faltered, and she collapsed. At first, no one believed it. Then the truth hit. Reagan wasn't moving. Her lips were turning purple. Willie pushed through executives frozen in panic and dropped to his knees. "Miss Ashcroft, can you hear me?" No pulse. He tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths. "Is he kissing her?" someone shrieked. "That's disgusting." Willie ignored them and started chest compressions. 1, 2, 3. A blow landed hard on his back. "You filthy janitor, don't touch her," someone hissed. Willie didn't stop. 27, 28, 29. Suddenly Reagan's chest jerked violently. She coughed hard, sucking in air. She was breathing. Willie collapsed, trembling, his back burning. He had saved her. "What's your name?" the CFO demanded coldly. "Willie Kellerman. I'm a janitor." "You put your mouth on Miss Ashcroft. You need to leave immediately." Willie bent down, grabbed his bucket with shaking hands, and walked out. Not a single thank you. But he had no idea that moment would change his life forever. But before the moment that would change everything, there was a different man. If you're enjoying this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories that will touch your heart. Willie Kellerman had never planned to end up as a janitor at 38 years old, working night shifts in one of Philadelphia's most prestigious corporate towers while raising his 6-year-old daughter Molly alone. Life had different plans. 5 years ago, Willie had been an EMT with the Philadelphia Fire Department, responding to emergency calls across the city, saving lives in ambulances racing through traffic with sirens blaring. He loved the work, the adrenaline, the purpose, the knowledge that his skills made a difference between life and death. He was good at it too, respected by his colleagues, trusted by the paramedics he worked alongside. Then came the accident that changed everything. Willie was responding to a multi-vehicle crash on I-95 during a winter storm. Black ice had sent cars spinning across lanes, metal crumpling, glass shattering, people trapped and bleeding. Willie was extracting an injured driver from a crushed sedan when another car lost control on the ice and slammed into the emergency vehicle he'd been using for cover. The impact threw Willie 15 feet, his body hitting pavement hard. He woke up in the hospital with fractured ribs, a broken collarbone, severe concussion, and traumatic brain injury that left him with chronic migraines and seizure risk. The doctors said he'd recover physically mostly, but the seizure disorder disqualified him from field work permanently. The fire department couldn't risk an EMT having a seizure while treating patients or driving emergency vehicles. They offered him desk positions, dispatch, training coordination, administrative work. All honorable, all well compensated. All meaning he'd never again respond to calls, never again save lives in the field, never again do the work that had defined who he was. Willie tried the desk job for 6 months. It felt like drowning slowly, sitting in climate-controlled offices while dispatch radios crackled with emergencies he couldn't respond to, filing paperwork while his former colleagues ran toward danger. The migraines came frequently, triggered by stress and fluorescent lights, leaving him nauseous and unable to work for days at a time. His performance reviews noted attendance concerns and difficulty adapting to administrative responsibilities. Finally, Willie resigned before they could fire him, accepting a modest disability pension that barely covered rent. Around the same time, his wife Lauren left. They'd been together since high school, married at 22, had Molly when Willie was 32. Lauren had been a nurse, understanding and supportive through Willie's EMT career, patient with the long shifts and emotional toll of emergency work. But the accident changed everything. Willie's injury meant medical bills, lost income, career uncertainty, mood swings from the head injury, chronic pain he managed poorly. Lauren tried to handle it for a year, but resentment built like pressure in a sealed container. She wanted the old Willie back, confident, capable, providing for his family. The new Willie, struggling with migraines and unemployment and depression, wasn't what she'd signed up for. When Molly turned 3, Lauren sat Willie down and said she was done. She'd fallen in love with a physician at her hospital, someone stable and successful, someone who could give her the life she deserved. She wanted a divorce. She didn't want custody of Molly. Being a single mother would complicate her new relationship, and she was honest enough to admit she'd never been maternal, had gotten pregnant accidentally, and stayed because divorce seemed harder than staying. Willie could have Molly. Lauren would send money occasionally, but wanted a clean break otherwise. The divorce was finalized within months. Lauren moved to Boston with her new partner, remarried quickly, started a new life that didn't include her daughter. Molly, too young to fully understand, asked occasionally where Mommy went. Willie explained gently that Mommy lived far away now, that sometimes grown-ups' lives changed, but that Daddy would always be here, would never leave. Molly accepted this with 3-year-old resilience, because children adapt when they have no choice. Willie found himself at 33 years old, medically retired from the career he loved, divorced, raising a toddler alone on disability payments that barely covered rent in a cramped West Philadelphia apartment. He needed work that accommodated his medical restrictions. No driving, no high-stress environments that might trigger seizures, nothing requiring sustained concentration that migraines made impossible. Janitorial work fit those requirements. Night shifts meant he could care for Molly during the day, and the work was straightforward enough that he could manage it even when fighting headaches. For 5 years, Willie mopped floors, emptied trash, cleaned bathrooms, and scrubbed windows in office buildings across Philadelphia. He worked for cleaning contractors who paid minimum wage and offered no benefits, moving from building to building as contracts changed. 6 months ago, Willie landed a position at Ashcroft Holdings, a massive corporate tower in Center City that housed one of the wealthiest corporations on the East Coast. The pay was slightly better, the hours consistent, and most importantly, his supervisor, Janet Holloway, a kind woman in her 50s who'd raised 4 kids herself, was willing to accommodate Willie's medical needs when migraines struck. Willie's routine was simple and exhausting. Wake at 6 a.m. When Molly stirred, make breakfast, get her dressed for kindergarten, walk her to the bus stop. Come home, clean the apartment, do laundry, pay bills, maybe sleep for a few hours if migraines allowed. Pick Molly up from school at 3 p.m., help with homework, make dinner, play with her, give her a bath, read bedtime stories, tuck her in by 8 p.m. Then Janet Holloway would arrive to stay with sleeping Molly while Willie headed to his night shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., mopping floors and cleaning executive offices while the corporate world slept. Janet was a lifesaver, a neighbor who'd known Willie since he moved into the building and had watched Molly grow up. She charged almost nothing for overnight babysitting, just $20 a night, far below market rate, because she liked Molly and respected Willie's work ethic. "You're doing right by that little girl," Janet would say. "Not every father would stick around like you do. Your daughter's lucky to have you." Willie didn't feel lucky. He felt exhausted, trapped, invisible. The executives whose offices he cleaned walked past him as if he didn't exist, their expensive shoes clicking on floors he'd polished, their trash overflowing in bins he'd empty. He was background noise in their world, a necessity they never acknowledged. But he showed up every night, did his work with quiet competence, collected his paycheck, and went home to the only person in the world who actually saw him, Molly, with her gap-toothed smile and endless questions and absolute faith that Daddy could fix anything. Willie kept his EMT certification current, renewing it every 2 years, even though he'd never work in the field again. It felt like holding on to a part of himself that hadn't broken. A reminder that he used to be someone who saved lives, instead of someone who cleaned up after people who barely noticed he existed. He took free CPR refresher courses at the community center, practicing chest compressions on training dummies, maintaining skills he'd probably never use. It was all he had left of who he used to be. Molly was now 6 years old, bright and curious and resilient, despite only having one parent who worked all night and slept through half the day. She had Willie's dark brown hair and hazel eyes, Lauren's sharp intelligence and independence. She loved science and building things, spending hours constructing elaborate structures with blocks and cardboard boxes. She asked endless questions about how things worked, electricity, weather, the human body, everything. Willie answered as best he could, encouraging her curiosity, buying second-hand books from thrift stores to feed her endless appetite for learning. Money was always tight. Willie's disability pension plus janitorial wages totaled maybe $35,000 a year before taxes, barely enough to cover rent, utilities, food, and Molly's basic needs. There was never extra for treats or toys or vacations. Molly wore hand-me-down clothes from Janet's grandchildren, celebrated birthdays with homemade cake instead of parties, learned early that "we can't afford that" was a complete sentence. But she never complained. She seemed to understand instinctively that Daddy was trying his best, working hard, that love mattered more than stuff. The night before the incident that would change everything, Willie sat with Molly reading The Giving Tree for probably the 100th time. It was her favorite book, the story of a tree that loved a boy so much it gave him everything, apples, branches, trunk, until only a stump remained. Molly always cried at the end when the old man sat on the stump and the tree was happy. "That's like you, Daddy," Molly said as Willie closed the book. "You give me everything and you're always happy even when you're tired." Willie's throat tightened. "I'm happy because I have you, sweet pea. You're the best thing in my whole life." "Even better than being an EMT?" Molly asked seriously. "1,000,000 times better," Willie promised, kissing her forehead. "Now sleep. School tomorrow." Willie tucked her in, turned out the light, and stood in the doorway, watching her breathe in the darkness. She was everything. His purpose. His reason for waking up and pushing through pain and exhaustion day after day. As long as Molly was okay, Willie could handle anything. At 9:30 p.m., Janet arrived. Willie grabbed his lunch bag, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, a thermos of coffee, and headed to work. The night shift supervisor assigned him to the executive floors, which meant cleaning conference rooms and corner offices used by Ashcroft Holdings senior leadership. Willie pushed his cart through silent hallways, mopping polished marble, emptying trash bins, wiping down conference tables. He worked methodically, invisible labor that would be taken for granted come morning when executives returned to spotless offices without ever thinking about who cleaned them. Around 11 p.m., Willie was mopping near the main executive boardroom when raised voices caught his attention. The boardroom doors were partially open, light spilling into the hallway. Willie knew he wasn't supposed to be near active meetings. Janitorial staff were instructed to work around executive schedules, cleaning spaces only when unoccupied. But this meeting was scheduled to have ended at 10:30, according to the calendar posted outside. Maybe they'd run late. Willie started to retreat quietly when he heard a woman's voice, clear and commanding. "These numbers don't lie. We've increased market share by 12%. Revenue is up 18% year over year, and our operating margins are the strongest they've been in 5 years. Ashcroft Holdings is thriving under this leadership. Reagan Ashcroft. Willie had never seen her in person. Executives and janitorial staff occupied different worlds, but everyone who worked in the building knew who she was. The billionaire CEO who'd inherited Ashcroft Holdings from her father at 28 and had spent 7 years proving she deserved to lead it. Industry magazines called her brilliant and ruthless. Employees called her demanding and fair. Willie called her nothing because their paths would never cross. He was about to push his cart away when he heard something change. The confident voice stopped mid-sentence. There was a sharp intake of breath, then silence, then chaos. "Miss Ashcroft? Reagan, are you okay? Someone call security. Oh my God, she's collapsing." Willie's EMT training kicked in before conscious thought did. He abandoned his mop and ran toward the boardroom, pushing through the partially open doors. The scene hit him in snapshots. Expensive suits, panicked faces, and Reagan Ashcroft on the floor, one arm across her chest, her body convulsing once, twice, then going still. "Call 911 now!" Willie shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. "She's turning blue." The executive stared at him like he'd materialized from nowhere. Several were on their phones but seemed frozen, unable to process what was happening. Reagan lay on her side, lips shifting from pink to purple to grey. Willie reached for her neck, pressing 2 fingers to her carotid artery. No pulse. She wasn't breathing. "Miss Ashcroft, can you hear me?" Willie said urgently, getting no response. His hands moved on autopilot, muscle memory from thousands of hours of training. He tilted her head back, opened her airway, pinched her nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths. "What are you doing?" someone shrieked. "Is he kissing her? That's disgusting." Willie ignored them. He locked his hands together, positioned them on Reagan's sternum, and began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4, counting to 30, maintaining rhythm, applying proper pressure. Everything the instructors had drilled into him during EMT training. Push hard, push fast, don't stop. Hands grabbed Willie's shoulder, yanking him. "Get off her! Who do you think you are?" Willie shrugged them off violently, continuing compressions. 15, 16, 17. Someone swung something hard into his back. Maybe a briefcase, maybe a baton, and pain exploded across his spine. He winced, but didn't stop. 23, 24, 25. "You filthy janitor!" another voice hissed. "Don't touch her with your dirty hands!" 30 compressions. Willie leaned down, gave 2 more rescue breaths. Someone grabbed his collar, trying to pull him away. Willie tore free and went back to compressions. His arms burned, his back throbbed where he'd been hit. But Reagan Ashcroft wasn't breathing, and he was the only person in this room who knew how to save her. "Don't die," Willie whispered through clenched teeth. "Don't die like this." 45 seconds of CPR. 60 seconds. Willie was preparing for another round of breaths when Reagan's chest suddenly jerked violently. She coughed hard, her whole body convulsing, then sucked in air like someone surfacing from deep water. Her eyelids fluttered. She was breathing. Willie collapsed backward, his whole body trembling. His back burned where someone had struck him. His shoulders ached. His hands were numb from compressions. But she was breathing. She was alive. He had saved her. The executives swarmed around Reagan now, their panic transforming into clumsy concern. "Miss Ashcroft! Alexandra! Stay with us!" Someone was crying. Someone else was on the phone with 911, shouting about a medical emergency at Ashcroft Holdings. The boardroom doors burst open and paramedics rushed in with equipment and a stretcher. Willie watched them work, recognizing the efficient choreography. checking vitals, administering oxygen, preparing for transport. These were his people, doing the work he used to do. One of the paramedics glanced at Willie, taking in the janitor uniform and the shaking hands. "You started CPR?" "Yes," Willie said, his voice weak. "She had no pulse. I gave rescue breaths and chest compressions until she came back." The paramedic nodded with professional respect. "Good work. You saved her life." They lifted Reagan onto the stretcher and wheeled her toward the elevators. The boardroom emptied quickly, executives following the paramedics, phones pressed to ears, discussing crisis management and publicity and liability. Willie sat on the floor where he'd collapsed, trying to catch his breath, his heart still racing. A tall man with silver hair and an expensive suit remained behind. His badge read, "Tyler Brigham, CFO." He looked at Willie with undisguised disgust. "What's your name?" "Willie Kellerman," Willie said, standing up on shaky legs. "I'm a janitor, night shift." "You put your mouth on Miss Ashcroft," Brigham said, his tone making it sound like contamination rather than life-saving. "She wasn't breathing," Willie replied. "I performed CPR. That's standard procedure for cardiac arrest." "I'll be reviewing the security footage," Brigham said coldly. "You need to leave immediately and do not return to work until you're contacted. Do you understand?" Willie's throat tightened. He'd just saved this man's boss from dying and was being dismissed like a problem to be dealt with. "I understand. Leave your equipment. Security will escort you out." Willie wanted to argue, to explain, to demand basic respect for saving Reagan Ashcroft's life. But he knew how this worked. He was a janitor. She was a billionaire CEO. His word meant nothing against their perception of impropriety. He bent down, grabbed his personal lunch bag from the cart, and walked toward the exit with as much dignity as he could manage. 2 security guards appeared, flanking Willie like he was a criminal. They escorted him through the building and out into the cold Philadelphia night. The doors locked behind him with a definitive click. Willie stood on the sidewalk, his breath visible in the frigid air, his back still throbbing from being struck, his hands still trembling from adrenaline. He'd saved a woman's life tonight, performed textbook CPR, brought her back from the edge of death, did exactly what his training had taught him, and he'd been thrown out like trash. Willie caught the late-night bus home, slumped in a hard plastic seat while the city streaked past the windows. He felt hollowed out, exhausted not just physically, but emotionally. By the time he reached his neighborhood, it was nearly 1 a.m. The streets were quiet except for distant sounds of trains and occasional voices from late-night gatherings. Janet met him at the door, her face concerned. "You're home early. Everything okay?" "Crazy night," Willie said, which was the understatement of the century. "Thank you for staying. I'll pay you tomorrow." "Don't worry about it, honey. Get some rest." After Janet left, Willie checked on Molly, watching her sleep peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. She looked so small, so trusting, so completely dependent on him. Willie had to keep this job, had to keep providing, had to make sure nothing disrupted Molly's stability. He lay down on the thin mattress in his room, staring at the ceiling while the heater sputtered. His back ached. His head was starting to hurt, migraine warning signs that meant tomorrow would be rough. He closed his eyes and saw Reagan Ashcroft's face, purple lips, eyes rolling back. Saw his hands on her chest, pumping life back into her. Heard the executive's disgust. "You filthy janitor, don't touch her." Willie had saved her. He knew he had. But as he drifted into fitful sleep, he wondered if that would even matter. The next morning arrived too soon. Willie's alarm went off at 6 a.m., and he dragged himself out of bed feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. His back was bruised where he'd been struck during the CPR attempt, and a migraine was building behind his eyes, that familiar pressure that meant pain was coming. He swallowed ibuprofen and forced himself through the morning routine. Make breakfast for Molly, help her get dressed, pack her lunch, walk her to the bus stop. Molly chatted about her upcoming science project while Willie tried to focus through the growing headache. "Can we make a volcano, Daddy, with baking soda and vinegar?" "Mrs. Patterson says we can do any experiment we want." "Sure, sweet pea," Willie said, kissing her forehead as the school bus arrived. "We'll work on it this weekend. Have a good day at school." After Molly left, Willie returned to the apartment and collapsed on the couch. The migraine was getting worse, vision blurring at the edges, nausea rising. He knew this pattern. By afternoon he'd be in bed with the lights off, barely able to move. But first, he needed to deal with work. Willie's phone rang around 9 a.m. Unknown number. He answered with growing dread. "Mr. Kellerman, this is Human Resources at Ashcroft Holdings. We need you to come to the office at noon today for a meeting regarding last night's incident." "Can you tell me what this is about?" Willie asked, though he already knew. "We'll discuss it in person. Please bring your security badge and any company property you may have." The call ended. Willie stared at his phone, nausea intensifying. "Bring your security badge." That meant termination. They were firing him for saving Reagan Ashcroft's life. At 11:30, Willie forced himself to shower and dress in clean clothes, despite the migraine making every movement feel like broken glass in his skull. He took the bus to Center City, walked to Ashcroft Holdings, and entered through the service entrance. The security guard, who'd always greeted him pleasantly, now avoided eye contact. Human Resources was a sterile office on the 3rd floor. Willie sat across from a woman named Patricia Chen, who looked at him like he was a particularly unpleasant task she had to complete quickly. "Mr. Kellerman, we're terminating your employment effective immediately for inappropriate conduct involving senior personnel." Willie's hands clenched. "I saved Miss Ashcroft's life. She had cardiac arrest. I performed CPR. That's not inappropriate conduct. That's emergency medical response." "We've reviewed the security footage," Patricia said, her tone flat. "Your actions included putting your mouth on Miss Ashcroft without her consent." "She was unconscious and dying," Willie interrupted, his voice rising despite the pain in his head. "Rescue breaths are part of CPR. She had no pulse. What was I supposed to do? Let her die?" "That's not for you to determine," Patricia replied. "You overstepped your role. You should have called for help and waited for paramedics." "I did call for help, but she would have been dead before paramedics arrived. Cardiac arrest is fatal within minutes without immediate intervention." Patricia slid a folder across the desk. "This contains your termination paperwork and your final paycheck. We're not offering severance. You have 10 minutes to collect any personal belongings from your locker, then security will escort you from the building. Do you understand?" Willie understood perfectly. He was being punished for saving a billionaire's life because he'd dared to touch her with his working-class hands. He understood that his EMT training, his years of experience, his successful resuscitation of Reagan Ashcroft, none of it mattered because he was a janitor and she was untouchable. "What about a letter of recommendation?" Willie asked, grasping at something, anything. "I've worked here 6 months without any complaints. I need references for my next job. Given the circumstances of your termination, we won't be providing recommendations." Willie left the HR office feeling like he'd been gutted. At his locker, he found the few personal items he'd kept there: an extra shirt, a package of crackers, a photo of Molly he'd taped inside the door. He shoved them into a plastic bag while a security guard watched impassively. On his way out, Willie passed several employees he'd worked alongside for months. None of them made eye contact. He caught fragments of whispered conversations. That janitor who assaulted Miss Ashcroft. Inappropriate contact. Disgusting what some people will do. The narrative had already formed. CPR had been twisted into assault. Saving her life had become attacking her. Willie Kellerman, the creepy janitor who'd put his hands on the billionaire CEO. Outside, Willie sat on a bench near the building and opened his phone. Text messages from co-workers at the cleaning company were waiting. "Did you really do something to Miss Ashcroft? People are saying you attacked her during a meeting." Man, that's messed up. Someone had posted about it on social media. Willie found the thread through someone's screenshot. Security footage shows Ashcroft Holdings janitor performing CPR on the CEO, but it looks like he's assaulting her. Fired immediately. Good riddance. But the comments were brutal. He's lucky he's not in jail. Probably planned it. These creeps pretending to help while assaulting women make me sick. Why would a janitor even know CPR? Suspicious. Willie wanted to scream. He wanted to show them his EMT certification, his years of training, the paramedics' confirmation that he'd saved Reagan's life. But he knew it wouldn't matter. The narrative was set. He was the villain. His phone rang. The cleaning company. Willie answered. "Willie, this is Marcus from Dispatch. I need to tell you that we're terminating your contract effective immediately." "Why?" Willie asked, though he knew. Ashcroft Holdings reported the incident. "We can't have employees with complaints of inappropriate conduct. It's a liability issue. Your final paycheck will be mailed." Another job gone. Willie ended the call and sat in numb silence. In less than 24 hours, he'd saved a woman's life and lost everything. His primary job, his contract with the cleaning company, his reputation, his ability to get references for future work. How was he supposed to provide for Molly now? How was he supposed to pay rent? The disability pension barely covered utilities. He needed work, needed income, needed... His vision blurred, and Willie realized he was crying. Right there on a public bench in Center City, Philadelphia, crying like a broken man because he'd tried to do the right thing and been destroyed for it. Willie pulled himself together enough to catch the bus home. By the time he reached his apartment, the migraine had bloomed into full agony. He took prescription medication, closed the blackout curtains, and lay in darkness while pain pounded through his skull. This was how the world repaid kindness, with accusations and unemployment and public humiliation. But the worst part, the part that made Willie want to scream into the void, was knowing that if he could go back, if he could be in that boardroom again, watching Reagan Ashcroft collapse, he'd make the same choice. He'd still start CPR. He'd still save her life. Because letting someone die when you have the skills to help isn't something Willie Kellerman could do, no matter the cost. He just wished the cost wasn't quite so devastating. Days blurred together in a haze of migraines and job searching and growing desperation. Willie filed for unemployment, but was denied because his termination was classified as conduct-related. He applied to every janitorial position, warehouse job, and retail opening he could find, but none called back. When he followed up, HR representatives would pause meaningfully and say they'd decided to go with other candidates. Willie knew what was happening. Ashcroft Holdings was a powerful corporation. A termination from them, especially one flagged for inappropriate conduct, was a career death sentence. No one wanted to hire the man accused of assaulting a billionaire CEO, even if the accusations were false. By the end of the first week, Willie was rationing food. He fed Molly properly. She never went without breakfast or lunch or dinner, but he skipped meals, telling her he'd eaten earlier. The rent was due in 3 weeks, and Willie had maybe $500 to his name. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Janet Holloway, bless her heart, stopped charging for babysitting when Willie explained he'd lost his job. "You just worry about getting back on your feet," she said firmly. "Molly can stay with me during the day while you job hunt. Don't you dare try to pay me." Willie wanted to argue, but pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Thank you, Janet. I'll pay you back when I can. You just take care of that little girl. That's payment enough." Molly sensed something was wrong, the way children do. She grew quieter, more clingy, asking questions Willie couldn't answer honestly. "Why aren't you working, Daddy? Are we going to be okay? Did I do something wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong, sweet pea," Willie would promise, holding her tight. "Daddy just had some trouble at work, but I'm fixing it. We're going to be fine." It was a lie. They weren't going to be fine. Willie was running out of money, running out of options, running out of time. 10 days after the termination, Willie's phone rang with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Creditors had started calling about late utility payments, but desperation made him pick up. "Mr. Kellerman, this is Grace Reeves. I'm an attorney representing Reagan Ashcroft." Willie's stomach dropped. A lawyer. They were suing him. He was going to lose everything and probably go to jail for saving someone's life. "I haven't done anything wrong," Willie said quickly. "I performed CPR, that's all. I have EMT certification. I can prove—" "Mr. Kellerman," Grace interrupted gently, "I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because Miss Ashcroft has been trying to reach you for over a week. She wants to meet with you. Today, if possible." Willie's mind went blank. "What?" "Miss Ashcroft has been recovering at home since the cardiac event. When she learned about your termination and the circumstances surrounding it, she became deeply concerned. She'd like to speak with you personally. Are you available this afternoon?" Willie looked around his cramped apartment. Unpaid bills on the counter, empty refrigerator, eviction notice that had arrived yesterday. What did he have to lose? "Yes," Willie said. "I'm available." 3 hours later, Willie stood in front of a massive penthouse building in Rittenhouse Square, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Philadelphia. The doorman looked at him with barely concealed disdain. Willie was wearing his best clothes, but best still meant old khakis and a button-down shirt with a frayed collar. "I'm here to see Reagan Ashcroft," Willie said, showing his ID. "She's expecting me." The doorman made a call, listened, then grudgingly directed Willie to the elevator. "Penthouse. Top floor." The elevator was nicer than Willie's entire apartment. Marble floors, gilded mirrors, soft classical music playing. Willie watched the numbers climb. 10, 15, 20, 25. When the doors opened, he stepped into a private foyer that led to a single door. Before he could knock, the door opened. A woman in her mid-30s stood there, black woman with close-cropped natural hair, wearing elegant casual clothes. "Mr. Kellerman, I'm Grace Reeves, Miss Ashcroft's attorney. Please, come in." Willie entered the penthouse and nearly stopped breathing. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Philadelphia skyline. Modern furniture that probably cost more than Willie earned in a year. Art on the walls that might be original pieces worth fortunes. This was wealth beyond Willie's comprehension. "Miss Ashcroft is in the sitting room," Grace said, leading him through the penthouse. "Before you speak with her, I want you to know that this conversation is off the record. Nothing you say will be used against you legally. Miss Ashcroft simply wants to thank you personally and discuss what happened." They entered a sitting room where Reagan Ashcroft sat in an armchair by the windows, afternoon sunlight illuminating her. Willie had only seen her briefly before she collapsed. Now he took in her appearance fully. She was probably mid-30s, with long, dark blonde hair, sharp, intelligent blue eyes, and fine-boned features that spoke of generations of wealth and privilege. She wore comfortable clothes, cashmere sweater, tailored pants, that probably cost more than Willie's rent. But she also looked fragile in a way that Willie recognized from his EMT days. Pale skin, shadows under her eyes, the careful movements of someone recovering from trauma. She'd survived cardiac arrest, and survival left marks. Reagan stood slowly, steadying herself on the chair arm. "Mr. Kellerman, thank you for coming." Her voice was the same one Willie remembered from the boardroom, clear, commanding, but softer now, tentative. She extended her hand. Willie shook it carefully, aware of the class difference even in this simple gesture. Her hand was soft, manicured, unmarked by labor. His hand was calloused, scarred, the hand of someone who worked with them. "Please, sit," Reagan said, gesturing to the couch across from her chair. "Would you like anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you," Willie said, sitting on the edge of the couch, uncomfortable in this space that cost more than he'd earn in a lifetime. Reagan sat back down, studying him with those sharp blue eyes. "I've spent the last 10 days trying to understand what happened in that boardroom. I've watched the security footage dozens of times. I've spoken with the paramedics who treated me. I've consulted with cardiac specialists, and every single one of them has told me the same thing: you saved my life." Willie didn't know what to say. He'd expected many things from this meeting: accusations, legal threats, demands, but not gratitude. "I had sudden cardiac arrest," Reagan continued. "A genetic condition I didn't know I had, long QT syndrome. My heart stopped beating. Without immediate CPR, I would have died within minutes. The paramedics confirmed that by the time they arrived, I would have been beyond resuscitation. You brought me back." "I just did what I was trained to do," Willie said quietly. "I'm a former EMT. When I saw you collapse, instinct took over." "A former EMT working as a janitor?" Reagan asked, but her tone wasn't mocking. It was genuinely curious. Willie explained briefly. The accident, the traumatic brain injury, the seizure disorder that ended his field career, the disability pension that wasn't enough to live on, the janitorial work that accommodated his medical restrictions while letting him raise his daughter. He didn't mention the divorce, the financial desperation, the eviction notice sitting on his kitchen counter. Some humiliations were too private to share. Reagan listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from curiosity to something that might have been respect. When Willie finished, she said, "So you have years of emergency medical training. You recognized cardiac arrest immediately. You performed textbook CPR despite being physically assaulted by my executives while you were trying to save me. And for this, you were terminated and publicly accused of assault." "That's about right," Willie confirmed. "That's unacceptable," Reagan said, her voice hardening into the CEO tone Willie remembered from the boardroom. "Completely unacceptable. I've spent the last week learning what happened after I was taken to the hospital. The CFO decided independently that you'd acted inappropriately. Human Resources terminated you without investigation. No one bothered to check your credentials or speak to the paramedics or review the medical facts of what CPR actually involves. They saw a janitor touching a billionaire," Willie said. "That's all they needed to see." Reagan flinched slightly, as if the words hit harder because they were true. "I've fired Tyler Brigham, the CFO who ordered your termination. I've restructured HR to ensure this never happens again. I've spoken to the paramedics and confirmed that your interventions saved my life, and now I want to fix what was done to you." Willie's heart started beating faster. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm offering you a position at Ashcroft Holdings as Director of Emergency Preparedness and Safety," Reagan said. "You'd be responsible for developing safety protocols, training employees in CPR and first aid, coordinating with emergency services, ensuring our facilities are prepared for medical crises. The salary is $95,000 annually, plus full benefits, health insurance, retirement matching, paid time off. Hours are flexible enough that you can be present for your daughter." Willie stared at her, unable to process what he'd just heard. $95,000. That was nearly triple what he'd been earning. That was stability, security. the ability to actually provide for Molly instead of barely surviving. "Why?" Willie asked, his voice breaking. "Why would you do this?" "Because you saved my life," Reagan said simply. "Because you were treated unjustly for doing the right thing. Because I've spent my career trying to build a company that values integrity, and what happened to you was the opposite of everything Ashcroft Holdings should stand for. And because—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Because watching that security footage, seeing you perform CPR while being hit and screamed at, never stopping, never giving up on me even when everyone else had frozen, that's extraordinary character. That's someone I want working for my company." Willie felt tears building behind his eyes. For 10 days he'd been drowning in desperation and shame and fear. Now someone was throwing him a lifeline, offering him dignity and security and a future. "I don't know what to say," Willie managed. "Say yes," Reagan replied. "Say you'll accept the position and let me fix what was broken. Say you'll help me build a company where people like you, people with skill and integrity and courage, are valued instead of dismissed." Willie thought about Molly, about the eviction notice, about the empty refrigerator and the crushing weight of trying to survive on nothing, about the chance to be someone she could be proud of again. "Yes," Willie said, "I accept." Reagan smiled, the first genuine smile Willie had seen from her. She extended her hand again, and this time when Willie shook it, it felt less like crossing a class divide and more like two people recognizing each other as equals. "Welcome to Ashcroft Holdings, Mr. Kellerman," this time through the front door. The transition from unemployed janitor to director of emergency preparedness happened faster than Willie thought possible. Reagan's attorney, Grace Reeves, handled everything: contract negotiations, benefits enrollment, background checks, setting up Willie's office. Within a week, Willie had a start date, a company email address, and an employee badge that labeled him as senior leadership rather than maintenance staff. The salary alone was life-changing. Willie paid his back rent, restocked the refrigerator with actual food instead of whatever was cheapest, bought Molly new clothes that fit properly instead of hand-me-downs. He didn't go crazy. Years of poverty had taught him caution. But having enough, having security, felt like breathing freely for the first time in years. Molly noticed the change immediately. "Daddy, why do you have so many groceries? Are we rich now?" "We're not rich, sweet pea," Willie said, laughing. "But we're going to be okay. Daddy got a really good job. You don't have to worry anymore." "I wasn't worried," Molly lied, but her relief was visible in how tightly she hugged him. Willie's first day at Ashcroft Holdings was surreal. He walked through the front entrance wearing business casual clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt that weren't second-hand, and approached the reception desk where he'd once been invisible. The receptionist looked up, smiled professionally and said, "You must be Mr. Kellerman. Welcome. I'll let Miss Ashcroft's office know you've arrived." Miss Ashcroft's office. Because Willie reported directly to the CEO now, because he was senior leadership, because the world had flipped in ways his brain still couldn't fully process. Reagan met with him personally that first morning, introducing him to department heads and explaining his role. "Willie Kellerman is our new Director of Emergency Preparedness," she told each group they encountered. "He's a former EMT with extensive training in emergency medical response. He'll be developing protocols to ensure employee safety and coordinate our response capabilities. I expect everyone to give him full cooperation." The executives who'd been in the boardroom during Reagan's cardiac arrest looked uncomfortable when introduced to Willie. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered stiff handshakes and forced pleasantries. None acknowledged that they'd hit him, screamed at him, tried to pull him away while he was saving Reagan's life. Willie didn't push it. He was here to work, not to settle scores. His office was on the 12th floor with windows overlooking the city. It had a desk, a computer, a phone, furniture that was comfortable and professional. It had his name on the door, Willie Kellerman, Director of Emergency Preparedness. Willie sat in his chair and had to fight the urge to cry. The work itself was challenging but satisfying. Willie developed comprehensive emergency protocols, CPR and first aid training for all employees, AED devices installed throughout the building, evacuation procedures for different crisis scenarios, coordination with local emergency services. He brought in paramedics to run training sessions, taught classes himself, built relationships with fire and police departments to ensure rapid response capabilities. He also made sure every employee, from executive to maintenance staff, received the same level of training. Willie remembered too clearly what it felt like to be invisible. He made sure everyone knew their value, their capability, their importance in keeping each other safe. Reagan checked in with Willie regularly, sometimes formally in scheduled meetings, sometimes informally when she'd stop by his office. "How's Molly?" she'd ask. "How are you adjusting to the new role? Do you have what you need?" One afternoon, about 6 weeks into the position, Reagan knocked on Willie's office door carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I sit?" "Of course," Willie said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Reagan handed him 1 coffee and sat down with the other. For a moment she was quiet, just looking out the window at the Philadelphia skyline. Finally she said, "I've been thinking about something, about what happened in the boardroom." "You don't need to." "Let me finish," Reagan said gently. "I've thought about it a lot, about how I felt lying on that floor, my heart stopping, everything going dark. I was conscious for part of it, before everything went black. I felt myself dying. And the last thing I remember before losing consciousness was thinking, this is it. I'm 35 years old and I'm dying alone on a conference room floor surrounded by people who work for me but don't actually care about me." Willie stayed quiet, sensing she needed to say this. "Then I woke up in the hospital," Reagan continued, "and the paramedics told me that someone had performed CPR, that I'd been clinically dead for nearly 2 minutes, that without immediate intervention I would have died. They showed me the mark on my chest from the compressions. You cracked one of my ribs, did you know that?" Willie winced. "I'm sorry, I don't apologize," Reagan interrupted. "Cracked ribs mean you were doing it right, means you pushed hard enough to actually circulate blood. The doctors said that's what saved me. Proper technique, proper pressure, not giving up. And I asked who did it. The paramedics said a janitor, someone who used to be an EMT, someone who just acted." She turned to look directly at Willie. "You didn't know me. You had no obligation to help me. You were literally being hit and screamed at while trying to save my life, and you didn't stop. Why?" Willie thought about how to answer honestly. "Because I couldn't not help. I saw someone dying who I had the skills to save. Everything else, your job, my job, the class difference, the consequences, none of that mattered in that moment. Only the fact that you needed help, and I could give it." Reagan nodded slowly. "I've been a CEO for 7 years. I've built this company into something profitable and powerful. I've made decisions worth billions of dollars. I've been called brilliant and ruthless and visionary, but none of that meant anything when my heart stopped. What mattered was one person, a person I'd never even noticed before, choosing to see me as a human being worth saving." "You are worth saving," Willie said quietly. "So are you," Reagan replied. "And I want you to know something. Creating this position for you wasn't charity. It wasn't guilt. It was recognizing that someone with your integrity and skill and courage is exactly the kind of person I need, helping me build this company. You're not here because I owe you. You're here because you've earned it." Something shifted in Willie's chest. A weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying lifting slightly. He'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to be revealed as temporary or conditional. But Reagan was telling him, "This is real. You deserve this. You've earned this." "Thank you," Willie said, "for the job, for the chance, for—" his voice caught, "for seeing me when no one else did." "Thank you for saving my life when everyone else just watched," Reagan replied. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching the city below. Willie thought about how much had changed in 6 weeks, how he'd gone from desperate and drowning to stable and valued. How one moment of doing the right thing had somehow, impossibly, led to this. Over the following months, Willie and Reagan developed an unexpected friendship. It started professionally, meetings about safety protocols, discussions about emergency preparedness, but gradually became something more personal. Reagan would invite Willie to lunch, not to discuss work, but to talk about life. Willie learned that Reagan's wealth had come at a cost, a controlling father who'd built Ashcroft Holdings, but never believed his daughter was capable of running it, a mother who'd died when Reagan was young, relationships that failed because people wanted the money, not the person. Reagan learned about Willie's struggles, raising Molly alone, managing chronic health issues, rebuilding life after everything fell apart. They were from completely different worlds. Reagan with her penthouse and private wealth, Willie with his modest apartment and second-hand furniture. But they'd both experienced the loneliness of being invisible. Reagan invisible behind her money and position, Willie invisible because of his poverty and service work. They recognized something in each other, a shared understanding that human worth isn't measured by status or wealth. One evening, Reagan invited Willie and Molly to dinner at her penthouse. Willie was nervous. Taking Molly into Reagan's world felt like crossing a boundary, but Reagan had been insistent. "I'd like to meet the little girl you talk about so much, and she should see that the person her dad saved is grateful." Molly was awestruck by the penthouse, her 6-year-old brain trying to process the luxury. "Daddy, is this where Miss Reagan lives? It's like a castle. Can I look at the books? Is that a real painting?" Reagan laughed, genuine, warm laughter that Willie had rarely heard. "You can absolutely look at the books, Molly. And yes, that's a real painting. Do you like art?" Molly nodded enthusiastically. "Daddy takes me to the art museum on free days. We look at paintings and I make up stories about what's happening in them." "That's wonderful," Reagan said. "Would you like to hear the real story behind that painting?" She spent 20 minutes talking with Molly about art and books and science, treating the 6-year-old with genuine respect and interest. Willie watched, his heart full, seeing his daughter engage with someone who saw her as a person worth listening to rather than a child to be tolerated. Over dinner, Reagan had ordered food from a restaurant Willie couldn't afford, but Molly enjoyed tremendously. Molly asked the question Willie had been dreading. "Miss Reagan, did my daddy really save your life?" Reagan looked at Willie, then back at Molly. "Yes, he did. My heart stopped working, and your daddy knew exactly what to do to make it work again. He's a hero." "I know," Molly said matter-of-factly. "He's always been my hero. Now he's your hero too." Reagan's eyes got suspiciously bright. "Yes, he is." After dinner, Molly fell asleep on Reagan's couch while the adults talked. Reagan covered her with a cashmere throw blanket and said quietly, "She's remarkable. You've done an incredible job raising her alone." "I've done my best," Willie said. "It hasn't been easy, but she's worth everything." "I've been thinking," Reagan said carefully, "about what you told me about your health issues, the seizure disorder, the migraines. I have connections with some of the best neurologists in the country. Would you let me arrange consultations? There might be treatments available that you couldn't access before because of insurance limitations." Willie's pride wanted to refuse. Accepting medical help felt like charity, but his practical side knew Molly needed him healthy. Are you sure? I'm sure, Reagan said firmly. You saved my life. The least I can do is help you manage yours. The neurologists Reagan connected Willie with were indeed the best. They ran comprehensive tests, tried new medications, developed management strategies that actually worked. The migraines didn't disappear, but they became less frequent and less severe. The seizure risk stabilized. For the first time in years, Willie felt like his body was something he could manage rather than something constantly betraying him. A year after Willie saved Reagan's life, Ashcroft Holdings held their annual gala fundraiser supporting medical research. Willie had been planning to skip it. Galas weren't really his scene, and the ticket price was astronomical, but Reagan had insisted he attend as her guest. "You're senior leadership now," she'd said. "You should be there, and I'd like you there. Bring Molly if you need to. We'll arrange childcare at the event." So Willie found himself in a rented tux at a luxury hotel ballroom, surrounded by Philadelphia's wealthy elite. He felt profoundly out of place until Reagan appeared beside him. "You look terrified." "I am terrified," Willie admitted. "I don't belong here." "Neither do I most of the time," Reagan said. "But we fake it together. Come on, I want to introduce you to people as my Director of Emergency Preparedness who saved my life. Make them uncomfortable with their assumptions about who gets to be important." She did exactly that, bringing Willie into conversations with corporate leaders and philanthropists and introducing him with the story of the cardiac arrest. Willie watched their faces shift from polite dismissal to genuine interest as they learned about his EMT background and his work developing safety programs. During dinner, the gala organizer made announcements and recognized major donors. Then Reagan took the microphone. "I want to tell you about something that happened last year," she began. "I had sudden cardiac arrest during a board meeting. My heart stopped. I was clinically dead. And the only reason I'm standing here tonight is because someone had the courage and skill to act immediately." The ballroom went silent. That person was Willie Kellerman, who was working as a janitor in my building at the time. Willie is a former EMT with years of emergency medical training. When I collapsed, he didn't hesitate. He performed CPR while being physically assaulted by my executives who thought a janitor had no right to touch me. He saved my life. And then he was fired for it. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I'm telling you this," Reagan continued, "because Willie's story represents something I think we all need to remember, that human worth isn't determined by job titles or bank accounts, that the most important moments of our lives often depend on people we've never noticed, that courage and integrity matter more than status." She gestured for Willie to stand. He did, reluctantly, feeling hundreds of eyes on him. "Willie Kellerman is now our Director of Emergency Preparedness," Reagan said. "He's trained hundreds of our employees in CPR and first aid. He's developed protocols that have already saved 2 lives in our facilities this year. He's built something extraordinary from a moment of crisis. Willie, would you come up here, please?" Willie walked to the stage, his heart pounding, wondering what Reagan was doing. Reagan turned to him with a genuine smile. "This gala raises money for medical research. This year, Ashcroft Holdings is donating $1 million in your name to cardiac research and emergency medical training programs, because you saved my life and I want to help save others." The ballroom erupted in applause. Willie stood there, stunned, as Reagan shook his hand and the crowd stood in ovation. He thought about where he'd been a year ago, desperate, unemployed, publicly humiliated, certain he'd lost everything. He thought about the moment in the boardroom when he'd made the choice to act despite the consequences. That choice had brought him here, to stability, purpose, dignity, friendship, to a life where Molly would never have to worry about eviction or empty refrigerators. To work that mattered and people who valued him, to the knowledge that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, can somehow lead to something better than you imagined. After the gala, Reagan and Willie stood outside while valets retrieved cars. The Philadelphia night was cool and clear, the city lights reflecting off glass towers. "Thank you," Willie said, "for the donation, for everything you've done this year, for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for saving my life when everyone else just watched," Reagan replied. "And for teaching me that the most important people are often the ones we don't see. You changed my company, Willie. You changed me." Willie thought about Reagan before her cardiac arrest, the demanding CEO who'd never noticed the janitor cleaning her office. He thought about Reagan now, still demanding, still brilliant, but softer somehow, more aware of the humanity around her. Crisis had changed them both, breaking them down and rebuilding them into different people. "We make a good team," Willie said. "Yeah," Reagan agreed. "We really do." 2 years after the cardiac arrest, Willie stood in his office at Ashcroft Holdings reviewing emergency preparedness reports when his phone rang. It was Molly's school. "Mr. Kellerman? This is Principal Hayes. Molly's fine, but we've had an incident. One of our teachers had a medical emergency. We think a stroke. Molly told us to call 911 and started directing other students to safety. She knew exactly what to do. She said her daddy taught her." Willie's chest swelled with pride. He'd been teaching Molly basic emergency response, wanting her to know how to handle crises. Hearing she'd actually used that knowledge was incredible. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Willie said. At the school, he found Molly sitting calmly in the principal's office while paramedics worked in the classroom down the hall. Molly ran to him. "Daddy!" Mrs. Patterson got sick and couldn't talk right, and her face looked weird. "I remembered you said that's a stroke, and you have to call 911 fast. Did I do good?" "You did perfect, sweet pea," Willie said, holding her tight. "I'm so proud of you." The principal approached. "Mr. Kellerman, your daughter potentially saved Mrs. Patterson's life. She recognized the symptoms, called for help, and kept the other students calm. That's extraordinary for an 8-year-old. Willie looked at Molly, seeing himself reflected in her calm competence, her willingness to act when others froze, her understanding that helping people mattered more than being comfortable. He'd raised her to see crisis as an opportunity to make things better, and she'd internalized that lesson. That evening, Willie called Reagan to tell her about Molly's quick thinking. Reagan's response was immediate. "She's remarkable, just like her father. You know what? I want to start an emergency preparedness program for schools, teaching kids what Molly knows. Would you be willing to develop it?" Willie thought about all the children who could learn to recognize medical emergencies, call for help, perform basic first aid. About kids like Molly becoming adults who didn't freeze when someone needed help. About building a culture where ordinary people had extraordinary capabilities. "Yes," Willie said. "Absolutely yes." The program launched 6 months later. Young Heroes Initiative, teaching age-appropriate emergency response to elementary and middle school students across Philadelphia. Willie developed curriculum, trained teachers, visited classrooms to teach hands-on skills. Molly came with him sometimes, demonstrating techniques and encouraging other kids that they could learn this too. The program saved its first life within a year. A 10-year-old girl recognized her grandfather's heart attack symptoms and called 911, giving paramedics time to intervene. The local news covered the story, interviewing the girl and highlighting Willie's training program. More schools wanted in, other cities reached out. What started as an idea became a movement. 3 years after Willie saved Reagan's life, Ashcroft Holdings held another gala. This time, Willie attended comfortably, no longer out of place but genuinely part of the community Reagan had built. Molly came too, now 9 years old and confident in formal settings, because Reagan had included her in enough events that she'd learned to navigate them. During the evening, Reagan took the microphone again. 3 years ago, I told you about Willie Kellerman saving my life. Tonight, I want to tell you what he's built since then. She outlined the emergency preparedness programs, the lives saved, the Young Heroes initiative spreading across the country. Willie took a moment of crisis and transformed it into systematic change. He's trained thousands of people. He's saved countless lives. He's proven that ordinary people, given knowledge and courage, can do extraordinary things. Reagan looked directly at Willie. Willie, come up here, please, and bring Molly. Willie and Molly joined Reagan on stage. Reagan knelt to Molly's level. Molly, your daddy saved my life, and in doing that, he changed both our lives. I want you to know that your dad is a hero, not just to me, but to thousands of people he's never met. And you're pretty heroic, too. She handed Molly an envelope. This is a full scholarship to any college you want to attend, starting whenever you're ready. Because your dad gave me the gift of life, and I want to give you the gift of education and opportunity. Molly's eyes went wide. Willie felt tears building. Reagan, you don't have to. I want to, Reagan said firmly. You gave me life. Let me help give Molly her future. The crowd applauded again, but Willie barely heard it. He was looking at his daughter, seeing her amazement and joy, knowing that her path would be different than his, that she'd have opportunities he'd never dreamed of. All because he'd made one choice: to act instead of freeze, to help instead of walk away, to do what was right even when it cost him everything. 5 years after the cardiac arrest, Willie Kellerman stood in his apartment, a much nicer apartment now, in a safer neighborhood, spacious enough that Molly had her own bedroom and Willie had an office. He was preparing for a speaking engagement at a medical conference where he'd present on civilian emergency response training. His work had expanded beyond Ashcroft Holdings into a consulting practice that helped organizations nationwide develop safety programs. Molly, now 11, was at the kitchen table doing homework. She'd grown into a thoughtful, confident kid who wanted to be a doctor someday. She had Reagan's scholarship waiting for her, sure, but she also had Willie's work ethic and determination and understanding that helping people mattered most. Willie's phone rang. Reagan. They talked regularly now, not as boss and employee, but as genuine friends. Willie had even met Reagan's partner, a trauma surgeon named Dr. Sarah Chen, who Reagan had met during cardiac rehabilitation. They'd been together for 2 years, Sarah's medical expertise and Reagan's business acumen, creating a partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. Hey, Willie, Reagan said. I'm calling because I want to run something by you. Sarah and I have been talking about starting a foundation focused on emergency medical access and training. We want you to run it. Willie sat down. Run it? Director position. You'd design the programs, oversee implementation, build the team. Significant budget, complete autonomy, opportunity to expand Young Heroes nationwide. Salary commensurate with the responsibility. What do you think? Willie thought about the janitor he'd been 5 years ago, invisible and desperate, believing his life had peaked and would only decline. He thought about the moment he'd chosen to act, to save Reagan despite the cost, not knowing it would lead here, to meaningful work, financial stability, genuine friendship, and now an opportunity to build something that could change countless lives. I think, Willie said slowly, that 5 years ago I was lying on a bus stop bench, fired and broke, and certain I'd destroyed my life by doing the right thing. And I think about how wrong I was, how that moment led to everything good in my life now. And I think, yes, absolutely yes, I'll run the foundation. Reagan's delighted laugh came through the phone. Excellent. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss details. And Willie, thank you for saving my life, for building something extraordinary from that moment, for being exactly who you are. After the call ended, Willie sat quietly, watching Molly do her homework, thinking about the strange path his life had taken, how crisis had led to opportunity, how loss had led to purpose, how one moment of courage had changed everything. Molly looked up from her math problems. "Was that Miss Reagan? You're smiling." "Yeah, sweet pea. She offered me a new job running a foundation, helping more people learn emergency response. Are you going to take it?" "I think so. What do you think?" Molly considered this seriously. "I think you should do it. You're really good at teaching people to help each other, and you always say doing stuff that helps people is the most important work there is." Willie had said that many times, teaching Molly that human worth came from how you treated others, how you responded to crisis, whether you acted or froze when someone needed help. She'd learned it well. "You're right," Willie said. "It is the most important work. I'm going to do it." That night, after Molly was asleep, Willie stood at his window looking at the Philadelphia skyline. Somewhere in that sprawl of lights was Reagan's penthouse, where she and Sarah were probably planning the foundation they'd entrust to Willie. Somewhere was Ashcroft Holdings, where Willie had built emergency preparedness programs that had saved lives. Somewhere was the old building where Willie had worked as a janitor, invisible and struggling, before everything changed. Willie thought about the moment in the boardroom, Reagan collapsing, executives freezing, his own decision to act despite consequences. That single moment had rippled outward in ways he couldn't have imagined, changing his life, changing Reagan's life, creating programs that taught thousands of people to respond to crisis instead of freezing, saving lives Willie would never know about. He thought about what Reagan had said at the first gala. Human worth isn't determined by job titles or bank accounts. The most important moments of our lives often depend on people we've never noticed. Willie had been one of those invisible people, the janitor no one noticed until the moment he saved a billionaire's life. And that moment had proven something Willie had always believed, but never been able to show, that worth isn't about status or wealth or position. It's about character, about choosing to act when others freeze, about recognizing that every human life has value, whether that person is a billionaire CEO or a single-parent janitor struggling to survive. Reagan had been worth saving not because she was wealthy or powerful, but because she was human, and Willie had been worth believing in not because he had impressive credentials, but because he demonstrated integrity and courage when it mattered most. They'd both learned something from that crisis. Reagan had learned to see the people she'd overlooked, to recognize that value came in unexpected forms. Willie had learned that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, can lead to something better than you imagined. 5 years after a single moment of crisis, Willie Kellerman stood in his comfortable apartment with his thriving daughter and an offer to run a foundation that would expand his life's work. He thought about the bus stop bench where he'd cried after being fired, about the moment he'd chosen to perform CPR despite being hit and screamed at, about Reagan extending her hand across the class divide and saying, "You deserve this. You've earned this." Willie had earned it, not through credentials or connections or privilege, through the simple, profound choice to act with integrity when the stakes were highest, through refusing to let someone die when he had the power to help, through being fundamentally a good person when it would have been easier not to be. The career he'd lost, the reputation destroyed, the desperate poverty, all of it had been worth it for this moment, for the knowledge that he'd done the right thing and somehow, against all odds, been rewarded instead of punished, for the chance to take that moment and build something lasting from it. Willie Kellerman had saved a life, and in doing so, he'd saved his own. The foundation launched a year later, the Kellerman Ashcroft Foundation for Emergency Response, funded with $50 million from Reagan and Sarah, dedicated to teaching civilian emergency response and improving access to rapid medical care. Willie built a team of 20 people, former EMTs, educators, program coordinators, and developed comprehensive initiatives spanning schools, workplaces, community centers, and public spaces. The Foundation's first major program was a national expansion of Young Heroes, teaching emergency response to children across the country. The second program focused on workplace training, ensuring businesses had staff trained in CPR, first aid, and crisis management. The third program addressed emergency medical access in underserved communities, funding ambulance services and equipment in areas where response times lagged. Within 3 years, the Foundation had trained over 100,000 people in emergency response. Lives saved were documented, cardiac arrests recognized and treated, severe allergic reactions managed with EpiPens, bleeding controlled, seizures handled properly, strokes identified quickly. The Foundation tracked outcomes, and the numbers were staggering. Hundreds of lives saved directly, thousands of outcomes improved through faster recognition and response. Willie traveled constantly, giving keynotes at conferences, meeting with community leaders, visiting schools and businesses, implementing the training programs. Everywhere he went, people wanted to hear the story, how a janitor had saved a billionaire and changed both their lives. Willie told it honestly, not shying away from the class dynamics or the injustice of his initial firing, but always emphasizing the core message that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when given knowledge and courage. Molly grew up watching her father build something meaningful from crisis. She saw him respected and valued, saw him change lives, saw him turn his own struggles into purpose. When she was 15, she gave a TED talk about growing up with a hero father who taught her that helping people mattered more than comfort or status. The talk went viral, watched millions of times, inspiring a generation of young people to learn emergency response. By the time Molly graduated high school, she'd decided on pre-med, wanting to follow both her father's path of helping people and Reagan's partner Sarah's career in trauma surgery. She had Reagan's scholarship, Willie's work ethic, and the confidence of someone raised to believe she could make a difference. At Molly's high school graduation, Reagan and Sarah sat beside Willie in the audience, watching Molly walk across the stage as valedictorian. "You've raised an incredible human," Reagan said quietly. "We both did," Willie replied. Because Reagan had been part of Molly's life for years now, attending school events, offering guidance, being a consistent presence that showed Molly what strong, successful women looked like. After graduation, at the celebration dinner Willie hosted, Reagan stood to give a toast. 18 years ago, I had cardiac arrest in a boardroom. Willie saved my life. What I didn't know then was that he was also saving Molly's future, because that moment led to this foundation, this work, this community. Molly, you're going to be an extraordinary doctor. You come from extraordinary people, and I'm honored to have been part of your journey." Molly hugged Reagan tightly. "You've been like an aunt to me. Both you and Sarah. Thank you for everything." Willie watched the people who mattered most to him, his daughter, his closest friend, Sarah, who'd become extended family, celebrating together. He thought about how profoundly life had changed from that moment of crisis, how saving Reagan had created ripples that spread far beyond either of them. The foundation continued growing. By its 10th year, it had trained over 1 million people, documented thousands of lives saved, and expanded into international programming. Willie's work had become a case study in how individual courage could create systemic change. Harvard Business School taught a case on the Kellerman-Ashcroft Foundation. Medical schools incorporated its training methods. Policymakers cited it when developing emergency response legislation. Willie Kellerman, the janitor who'd been fired for saving a life, had become Willie Kellerman, the architect of a movement that transformed how society approached civilian emergency response. The recognition was gratifying, but what mattered most to Willie were the stories. The 12-year-old who saved her diabetic mother, the office worker who recognized a colleague's stroke, the teacher who performed CPR on a student, the bystander who helped a stranger. Ordinary people, given knowledge and courage, doing extraordinary things. 20 years after the cardiac arrest, the foundation held an anniversary gala. Willie was now 58, his hair greying, his body showing the wear of decades managing chronic health issues, but still vital and engaged. Molly was 26, finishing her surgical residency, already showing the skill and compassion that would make her an exceptional trauma surgeon. Reagan was 55, still running Ashcroft Holdings, but with a gentler touch than her younger self had possessed. She and Sarah had married 10 years earlier, adopted 2 children, built a life that balanced professional success with personal fulfillment. At the gala, Reagan told the story one more time, how she'd collapsed, how Willie had saved her, how that moment had changed everything. But this time, she added something new. I was 35 years old when my heart stopped. I'd spent my entire adult life building a company, accumulating wealth, proving I deserved the position I'd inherited. I thought success meant profit margins and stock prices and industry respect. Then I died, literally died, and a janitor I'd never noticed brought me back. That experience taught me something I should have known all along, that success isn't measured in dollars or status. It's measured in impact, in the lives we touch, in whether we make the world better or just richer. Willie understood that before I did. He understood that saving one life, even a stranger's life, even at great personal cost, was worth everything. In 20 years, this foundation has trained millions of people. We've saved thousands of lives. We've changed how society thinks about emergency response and civilian capability. But more than that, we've spread Willie's core belief that every life has value, that ordinary people can be heroes, that doing the right thing matters even when it costs you everything. Willie saved my life in that boardroom, but he also taught me how to live with purpose, with integrity, with recognition that worth comes from character, not credentials. The Kellerman Ashcroft Foundation exists because one man chose courage over comfort, because one man saw a human being who needed help and acted despite consequences, because one man showed us all what really matters. Reagan looked at Willie with tears in her eyes. Thank you, Willie, for my life, for this work, for teaching me what success really means. Willie stood and hugged Reagan, both of them crying now, 20 years of friendship and shared purpose and mutual transformation overwhelming them both. The ballroom erupted in applause, hundreds of people standing, celebrating not just the foundation, but the moment of courage that had created it. Later that night, Willie stood with Molly on the hotel balcony, looking at the Philadelphia skyline. "Did you ever think our lives would turn out like this?" Molly asked. Willie thought about the cramped apartment, the empty refrigerator, the eviction notice, the bus stop bench where he'd cried after being fired. He thought about the moment he'd dropped his mop and run toward Reagan's collapsing body, not knowing that choice would lead to everything good in his life. "No," Willie admitted. "I thought I'd destroyed everything. I thought doing the right thing had cost me my last chance at stability. I was wrong." "You taught me that doing the right thing is always worth it," Molly said. "Even when it's hard, even when it costs you. You lived that lesson, and it changed everything." Willie pulled his daughter close. "The hardest part wasn't performing CPR or getting fired. It was believing things could get better when everything looked hopeless. Reagan gave me that. She saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. She proved that doing the right thing, even when it destroys you, can somehow lead to redemption. "I want to be like that," Molly said. "Like you and Reagan, seeing people's worth, helping even when it's hard, making choices that matter." "You already are," Willie promised. "You've always been my hero, Molly. Now you're going to be a hero to people you haven't even met yet." They stood together in comfortable silence, father and daughter, watching the city lights. Somewhere in that sprawl was the Ashcroft Holdings building where everything had changed. Somewhere was the old apartment where they'd struggled to survive. Somewhere were thousands of people trained by the foundation, carrying knowledge that might save lives. Somewhere was the next person who would face a crisis and choose to act instead of freeze, continuing the ripple Willie had started 20 years ago. Willie Kellerman had learned something profound from that moment in the boardroom, that crisis reveals character, that courage matters more than status, that one person's choice to act can change countless lives. He'd taken that lesson and built something lasting, not just a foundation, but a movement, a philosophy, a way of being in the world that valued every human life and recognized that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. He'd started as a janitor nobody noticed. He'd become a director, a founder, a teacher, a symbol of what integrity and courage could achieve. But most importantly, he'd remained himself. Willie Kellerman, single father, former EMT, someone who believed that helping people mattered most and who lived that belief even when it cost him everything. 20 years after saving Reagan Ashcroft's life, Willie stood on a hotel balcony with his daughter and thought about the journey, about how one moment of choosing courage over comfort had led to this: meaningful work, financial stability, profound friendship, a daughter who'd learned to value character over status, thousands of lives saved, a legacy that would outlast him. It had been worth it. Every moment of struggle, every sacrifice, every hard choice. Worth it because he'd stayed true to who he was, because he'd helped when helping mattered, because he'd proven that doing the right thing, even when the world punishes you for it, can lead somewhere beautiful. Willie Kellerman had saved a life, and in doing so, he'd saved so much more: his own sense of worth, his daughter's future, a billionaire's understanding of what mattered, thousands of strangers who would never know his name but would live because of his work. One moment, one choice, one person refusing to let another die. Everything had changed from there, and it had been worth it.